Are you seeking fulfillment for your life? Do you want freedom from fear? That's why we're here. Welcome to Jesus 101, introducing you to the real Jesus. And now, here's your host, Elizabeth Talbot.
Welcome to Jesus 101. Today we are talking about the plan of God. How does He put all the different scenes of history together to show one big picture? You know, have you ever seen a photo mosaic? A photo mosaic is a photo that is made of many little tiny photos. And that has helped me to understand how is it that God put together a plan of salvation. The cross is not just one day, one event, even though that faithful weekend in which Jesus died sealed our salvation for us. But the whole Bible is little photos here and there, stories of one person or the other, of this king, of this prophet, of this woman, who put all together make the history of redemption. And I know we struggle with God's timing and God's plan. We never really know from here, from earth, from our view that we have here, what is it that really God is doing? Because only He has the view. This is a beautiful blanket that was made for me by a man whose name is Robert, who wanted to contribute something to my ministry. He made this blanket out of many, many little squares. He loves to crochet. And you know, this blanket has given me actually a view of how is it that God puts together the plan in our lives. You probably have heard the story of the quilt. This was a woman who was quilting, and her son was sitting on the floor. And he was looking up, and every time he looked up, he saw these threads that made no sense. Of course, he didn't have the view that the mother had, but he could only see it from below. So he said to the mom, "Mom, what an ugly thing you're making there." And the mother said, "No, son, actually it's a beautiful thing, but from down there you can't really see what I'm making. But when I'm done, I'm going to sit you on my knees and you're going to be able to see what I see." So the little boy waited, and when she was finished, she invited him over, said, Look what I saw from up here while I was making this beautiful quilt." And the boy was amazed. It was such a beautiful blanket, a beautiful quilt made of so many different things, but he made a beautiful pattern when it was all together. You know, I can't wait for that day in which Jesus will invite me there in heaven and say, "Okay, sit here. I want to see you the view of your life that I had from up here." Now it's going to make sense to you. I know that it didn't always make sense from down there. So as the years go by and as I get older, I have come to trust God's plan, even though I don't fully always understand it. I don't always understand why this had to happen in this place and at that time. But, you know, at the cross, I have learned to trust His heart. And therefore, now I don't have to understand God in order to trust Him. As a matter of fact, I usually don't understand God. But I trust Him now because I know He has the plan. And I don't know the plan, but He knows the plan. Today we're going to study a woman whose life will become pivotal for the history of redemption. But she didn't understand the plan. And I don't think she ever understood it completely. Because we have a different view. We only have one photo in this big photo mosaic that is the history of redemption. And we're going to talk about her. Her name was Hannah. And Hannah became the mother of the prophet Samuel. And so we're going to go to the first book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 1. And you're going to see a woman in distress. And perhaps today, many of you that are watching are in distress because you don't understand why you need to go through what you're going through. Sometimes we don't understand. As a matter of fact, we usually don't understand. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 1, And we're going to find this woman that is in distress, and we are told why. There is this man whose name is Elkanah in chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. He has 2 wives. Verse 2, he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And so here we start the distress time in Hannah's life. See, it's very interesting to me that many times in the women that will become part of the covenantal line, we find that they are barren, because God doesn't want people to think that they will have a child just because women have children. But they're barren so that God can show His will in the child that is going to be born later. So many times the women in the covenantal line, one way or another, because they have a place in the history of redemption, will be barren. And in this case, Hannah is barren, and she had no children. And what this meant 3,000 years ago is that you were cursed of God. I mean, women mainly lived their lives to have children, and that was their legacy. That was their identity, really. And so here we have this woman who has no children. And verse 3 says that this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Now, Shiloh was a very special place where you met with God. So Hannah will take this opportunity to bare her soul and tell God how she's feeling and how she doesn't understand the plan. She doesn't understand why she would have to go through something like this. She doesn't understand why God is not allowing her to have children. And on top of that, she's being made fun of by the other wife, Peninnah. Have you ever been in a situation like that, where it looks like God's plan is really not working in your life? When it looks like God kind of forgot about you, and there seems to be blessing a lot of other people except you? This is the way that Hannah was feeling. Hannah was feeling that Peninnah had children, and when they went to Shiloh, she thought that this was the opportunity. This was the opportunity where she could actually tell God how distressed she really was. So we find a situation that happens then. Verse 4, when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters, because he had a big family. But to Hannah, the barren wife, he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had closed her womb. We have a very similar situation to Jacob's history. Jacob had also 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. And Rachel was the one he loved, but she was barren. So don't forget that in the Bible, patterns repeat themselves so that we get the topics, we get the story. So if you ever want to study the scriptures in light of the cross, every verse of the Bible, you need to look at the patterns and where are they located in the history of redemption. And you'll find out how exciting the way that God has worked is, so that we can see things and understand. And so her rival, verse 6, however, would provoke her bitterly. How do you like that? On top of the fact that she's so distressed, somebody's provoking her. It's like when you're having a bad day and somebody that you have close to you comes and adds to it, irritating you. She would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. And it happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. So not only is she distressed, not only is she provoked, but this is happening over and over and over again. When is it that you get tired and say, okay, Lord, that's it? I mean, how much can a person take, right? So Hannah, that time, did something a little different. Verse 8, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? This is something that only a man could have asked. This poor woman wants to have children, and the husband says, am I not better than 10 sons to you? No, Elkanah, you're not, because a husband is a husband and children, well, they're children. And so here we have verse 9. Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh and went to Eli the priest, who was sitting on the seat of the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Before I go on, I want to show you something that was given to me many years ago. These are two hands and a little baby. And the little baby is like graduating, asking where he should go. And underneath there is a verse, which is Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you. This was given to me by a very dear friend of mine. His name is Greg. And he gave it to me many years ago while I was going through a very, very difficult personal problem. One that I thought would never happen to me. And during this time of this stress, I was looking so much to see, well, where's the plan, you know? I mean, don't you always think that there is a plan and God is guiding? And I thought I was doing the things that God wanted me to do, and then this happened, and then my life kind of fell apart. And during this time, Greg was a great source of support, and he brought me this little figurine, which I hold very dear for many reasons. One is because I always imagined myself during that time under those big hands of God, and he was actually taking me wherever he wanted to take me, because I didn't understand where I was in the plan of my life. The second is because it's a little baby with a graduation hat. You know, that's how I felt. I felt like I have no clue what I'm supposed to do. Like I'm a little baby. And third is because of the verse. I know the plans I have for you. What great hope. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans of hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. And this is where Hannah was, you know, wondering, where am I supposed to go, Lord? So she goes to the temple. And we are told that she was so distressed. Verse 10, she was greatly distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. You know, those times in your life when you have just nothing left other than a prayer, which, by the way, if that's all you have left, it's enough. Because that's all the thief on the cross had left, was a prayer. Remember me when you come in your kingdom. And you know what? A prayer was enough. And maybe today you are in such distress that all you have left is a prayer. And this woman went and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she made a vow, verse 11. And the vow said this, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget me, but you will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. This is a Nazirite vow. Is a vow that will last forever, his whole life. A razor should not be on his head, which meant that he would be consecrated to the Lord. How would she have known how her little square in life, her little photo, how would she have known the place that it would have in salvation history? How would she have known that that vow that she just took would play a very pivotal role with what was coming up for the people of Israel? You know, you have this little square, and I have this little square, and somebody else had that little square, and all put together is the quilt that God is putting together, but we don't know the rest. We only know our little square. And by itself really doesn't make a lot of sense. So she is distressed and makes a vow. But on top of the fact that she's distressed because she's barren, and she's being provoked by Peninnah, and it happens over and over every year, on top of that, she goes to church. And I hope this has not happened to you, that you go to church to, open your soul, and somebody there says, you're not dressed up properly, you got to leave. Well, something like this happened to this woman. Verse 12 says that it came about as she continued praying before the Lord. She's pouring her soul to the Lord. And Eli the priest was watching. And all he saw was her mouth moving. Yeah, verse 13. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart. Only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Can you imagine? On top of the fact that all these things are happening to her, that she's looking to see what is the plan of God, making a petition in distress, and the priest, the one who was in the place of God for the people, who would take her to God, she's misinterpreted by him too, and he thinks she's drunk. So poor Hannah, everything's going bad for her. Eli said to her, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Oh, woman, put away your wine from you." But Hannah replied, "No, my Lord, you got this all wrong. I am a woman oppressed in spirit. Neither wine nor strong drink. I have poured out my soul before the Lord. That's what I've been doing. Do not consider your maidservant as worthless woman. I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation." And Eli answers in a way that, shows how bad he felt. Imagine. I mean, I must say this. This has happened. I've seen it happen in church, where somebody comes as their last resort. And somebody says, "Well, what are you doing here dressed like this? How come you didn't take this off your face before you came in here?" If we would know people's hearts and their distress and the oppression, and how sometimes they come as the last thing. They're at the end of the rope. She is like that. And Eli feels very bad. "Go in peace," he says. "May the God of Israel grant you your petition that you have asked of him." And guess what? A baby was born. She conceived, and the great prophet Samuel was born. He was a little baby, only 3 years old, when she took him to the temple and fulfilled her vow of giving him back to the Lord. But of course, she did not know that this prophet Samuel, this little boy that she asked for, that she gave back to the Lord and was in the temple continually. Let's read this. Chapter 1, verse 26. She said, "Oh, my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy," now she has her son, "I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he's dedicated to the Lord," and he worshiped the Lord there. As a little boy, Samuel goes to the temple and becomes a mighty figure for the Lord. As a matter of fact, so great that it will be Prophet Samuel who would be called to go anoint David as a king. See, imagine, Hannah does not know how her life fits in this whole thing. She's asking to know the plan of God. "Could you please give me a little baby?" God gives her a baby. Now Samuel has grown up, and he is the prophet of Israel. And God will use Samuel. So if you continue in Samuel, very soon, in chapter 16, Samuel is told to go to Bethlehem. Because don't forget that the whole Bible is written in patterns. So where was David born? Well, in Bethlehem, the same place where Jesus will be born as the son of David in the New Testament. So Samuel goes to Bethlehem, and it is Samuel who will anoint David king. But imagine if the story would finish here. No, it doesn't, because then David would become the king of Israel. David would be the one who will remember that he was anointed king by Samuel, who was the little boy who she was asking for when she was trying to figure out how her life fit in redemption history. But there's something very special. She will have Samuel who will anoint David king, and David would be promised a kingdom that would be forever. So if you follow the story, this is the magnificence of the Bible, that there is a storyline. And all the stories we are told in the Bible have something to do with salvation. So when David becomes king in 2 Samuel chapter 5, then the Lord will make a covenant with him. And he will tell him on chapter 7 that he would have a descendant and that the throne of his kingdom would be forever. For example, let me read for you 2 Samuel chapter 7, where God makes a covenant with David. And he says, let's read verse 14. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me, talking about his descendants. Verse 13, he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Now, little Anna could have never realized that when she was asking the Lord what was going to go on with her life and asking the Lord to give her a baby and her plans for her life, that this baby would anoint David king and that David would have a descendant and that the descendant of David would actually be Jesus Christ. There is no way that Hannah that day would have realized the plan that God had. There's no way. Now, let me tell you one more thing. In the Gospel of Luke, Mary's trying to figure out the same thing. Mary is engaged to Joseph. She's not married yet. She doesn't have sex with Joseph yet because they're not married. But one day, the angel comes and says, you will conceive. Again, we don't understand God's timing. We don't understand God's plan. And she's like, but I don't know a man sexually. How am I going to conceive? And the angel says, well, this will be something completely different. The Holy Spirit will come upon you. And what will happen inside of you will be something different. It's going to be the Son of the Most High. And so she doesn't understand God's plan. She doesn't. So the angel says, but I'm going to give you a sign. Your cousin Elizabeth is also pregnant. The one that was barren and that is old, she's pregnant. And so Mary, the first thing she does after the announcement, goes running to see Elizabeth to see if Elizabeth is pregnant. And when she gets there, Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant. When Mary comes in to Elizabeth's house, and John the Baptist, who hasn't been born yet, starts jumping up and down in her womb, and you can read all of it in Luke chapter 1, then Mary realizes that in fact she's going to be the mother of the Messiah. She realizes how blessed she is. And you know what? She sings the same song that Hannah sang when she had Samuel. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to show you how incredible, the Bible is so incredible in this. When Hannah had little Samuel, she sang a song of thanksgiving in 1 Samuel chapter 2. And it starts like this. Hannah prayed and said, my heart exalts the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies. And I rejoice in your salvation. And then she says, the bows of the mighty are shattered and the feeble gird on strength. And those who were full hired themselves out for bread. But those who were hungry ceased to hunger. What it says here is, I'm going to exalt the Lord because I thank him because he looks at the humble people. And those who thought they were great, he humbles them. But the humble come up with not empty-handed, but their hunger is turned to fulfillment. Well, the day that Mary realizes that in fact she's going to be the mother of the Messiah, she also uses the song of Hannah. And she starts singing, and it starts in the same way. My soul exalts the Lord, exactly like Hannah had said, my heart exalts the Lord. And we call this song the Magnificat because it's the first words of the song in Latin. And Mary starts saying, I'm going to exalt the Lord because I realized that he had a plan, and he had a plan for his people. And then she goes on and says the same things Hannah says. He has filled the hungry with good things, but he has sent away the rich empty-handed, because the plan of God didn't have the values that our plans have. Hannah says, wow, I have a son named Samuel. And Mary, many years later, 1,000 years later, is using the same song to say, well, I will have a son. He will be the Son of the Most High. And uses Hannah's song. And of course, the great announcement in Luke chapter 2 comes by the angels who say to the shepherds, we have good news for you. And you know that the Greek for great is mega. And the angels say, we have brought news of mega joy for you. Luke chapter 2, starting on verse 10. The angel said to them, do not be afraid. Behold, I bring you good news of mega joy, which will be for all the people. For today in the city of David, oh yeah, remember David? In the city of David, Bethlehem, because David was born in Bethlehem. Oh, I love this. This is getting so exciting. Today in the city of David, there has been born for you a Savior who is Christ the Lord. One of the most beautiful things is to read the Bible backwards. You know, you have the announcement of salvation. In the city of David, a Savior has been born. City of David, oh yes, because David was born in Bethlehem. Oh, and by the way, Samuel the prophet actually went to Bethlehem to anoint David. Oh, by the way, this all started because a woman came to pray to the Lord to know what his plan was. See, when you go backwards, all makes sense. But when we are in the middle of something looking forward and we're like, what is God's plan for me? See, this is one of those things that once you surrender to it and you come to a place where you decide you are going to trust the plan of the Master, you can live in peace even though you don't understand. You know, when I went through those hard times in my life, I had a statement, and I had it everywhere, and even in a keychain that I still keep until today. It said this: I do not know the master plan, but I know the Master planned it, and I am included. I'm going to say it again so you can write it down. I don't know the master plan, but I know the Master planned it, and I am included. You see, all of the history of redemption wasn't an accident. All the stories that we have, they were the big quilt that God was putting together for redemption. As a matter of fact, sometimes we think, oh, well, the death of Jesus was a mistake. No, but it wasn't. You see, what God was doing, and let's see if I can put this all together here. What God was doing a whole quilt of the history of redemption. You know, here in this one is so beautiful, what he made for me, is the cross that would save the world. And here we have the two choices that we always have, to choose or not to choose salvation. And here we have the tomb that Jesus went to and resurrection. All of this was the beautiful quilt that he was making, the history of redemption. Every piece, every part played a role in this history. Trust God's plan. He's the Master, and He has planned for you.